Well, good morning, everybody. I just call the meeting to order. Obviously, we're all here today for the Extraordinary Strategic Planning and Policy Committee for the 9th of August. Obviously, you've all got your agendas in front of you, so we'll kick off as we normally do with apologies. I have them from Mike Pettit and Hazel Barnes. Jim, you're going to move that for me, and Andrew will second those to accept. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Any disclosures of members' interests currently in respect of our item today? No, that's great. Then moving on to late items. Now, I understand staff have circulated a late item, which you should have received yesterday afternoon. Are we all on the same page with me in terms of it? Yep, we're all lots of nodding heads. So on that basis, there's a recommendation attached to that major late item in respect of the changes to Plan Change 26 provisions as at the 8th of August. So is somebody going to move that? Lou will move that. Claire will second that for me. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. So we will add that as a major late item. So moving on then to the confirmation of the order of the meeting. Claire will move. Bruce will second. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. So moving on to our only significant item today, which is the report regarding the decision to notify proposed Plan Change 26 in terms of the residential zone intensification. And we have a very large group of extremely overworked and hardworking staff to present this to us today, with Wayne Allen, Joe Cook-Munro and Tony Kurtz, Tony Quickcall. And I was wondering before, two Tonys, does that make them a Tony? I'm not quite sure. And I believe online we have Wendy Embling from Tompkins Wake, should we need her to make any clarifications for us. Morning, Wendy. Oh, look, here's the second Tony. Right, have a seat. The floor is yours. I understand you've got about a half an hour or so presentation. We wait with bated breath.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, Madam Chair, your worship councillors. So this is a presentation in relation to Plan Change 26. So I'll just make some short commentary prior to Joe going and taking you through the report. So as you're aware, the government has enacted the Enabling Housing Supply and Other Matters Amendment Act. These new laws are aimed at building more houses in existing residential zones of Tier 1 growth areas, and this includes Waipa District. Building of more houses, including affordable houses, is a commendable objective, particularly if the medium density houses are well planned, have good urban design outcomes, and constructed in the right locations, such as next to parks and reserves or along our major transportation corridors. Waipa District, that is how we plan for such higher medium residential density developments in our communities. The mix of housing typologies is important for a thriving urban community, provided the higher densities are located in the right location that can cater for that type of development. That is what makes our towns great places to live. We have a good track record here at Waipa District of ensuring that the planning of our growth areas is done in a structured and measured and affordable way by our Waipa 2050 growth strategy, and more recently, Ahuraki, our community spatial planning work, undertaking structure planning and more detailed infrastructure master planning as required of our growth cells, and the financial investment in public infrastructure detailed through our long-term plan to support that growth and development, with costs recovered via our development contributions. Unfortunately, we do not believe these new laws, which we as a council have to implement, will do anything to enhance residential amenity or character for our residential neighbourhoods, and it will impact on the affordability to upgrade the infrastructure to the appropriate standard to support the desired level of growth. It's been extremely disappointing that in the promulgation of the bill, Waipa District Council, along with other territorial authorities, were not consulted. We had to lodge submissions to the Select Committee. Waipa District Council chose to do so, seeking that our towns within our district were removed from the laws so that they did not apply to our residential zones. And this was not upheld by the Select Committee. Importantly, the new laws are significant, and the impact on our communities living within Cambridge, Te Awamutu and Kiki should not be underestimated. Over time, these changes have the potential to significantly change our neighbourhoods and the unique character we enjoy in our towns. The laws intend that in residential zones of our major towns, landowners may be able to extend or build up to 3 houses, up to 3 stories on each site, including reductions in the yard setbacks, less restrictions on boundary sunlight angles, and increased height requirements. As an example, that is a change from 7.5 metres to 11 metres in height in our current district plan without needing a resource consent. The changes will also introduce no minimum lot sizes for residential subdivisions within certain conditions, meaning more dwellings will be able to go in sections than have been allowed before. This is on the back of government restricting council's ability to control the minimum number of on-site car parking, including for residential developments. We simply cannot require car parking, excluding accessible parking, for developments any longer. And we've complied with that directive by removing the relevant car parking provisions from the district plan. In Waipa, these recent medium residential density law changes have the potential to increase housing density in the residential zones of Cambridge, Te Awamutu and Kiki. Work to date indicates most parts of our residential zones in our towns will simply not have the capacity and the infrastructure, pipes, stormwater, to support this kind of housing intensification. In fact, our final waters infrastructure modelling assessments have confirmed this, and Tony can elaborate that further. But by law, council is required to advise ratepayers now of potential changes to planning rules. Ratepayers in other growth areas in New Zealand, including the cities of Hamilton, Auckland, Tauranga, Wellington, Christchurch, Rotorua, to name some, and some smaller towns in the greater Waikato region are also being advised. As you're aware, these are big changes for our district, which have not been supported by you. We've made this point that one size fits all approach, which treats small towns like Cambridge, Te Awamutu and Kiki the same as large centres like Auckland and Hamilton, is not appropriate. We've made our views clear to government. The details of the plan change will now be discussed by the team, including the further changes completed since the agenda was issued. But it's important to note that we will not be proposing any more density on a residential site beyond 2 houses, which is what the district plan currently provides for without scrutiny through a resource consent process, given that we have identified qualifying matters limiting development. Now, this may change through the submission process, which will be considered by an independent hearings panel, with recommendations on the plan changes submissions provided through to council to make decisions, and with the Minister for the Environment able to make any final decisions on recommendations the council rejects. There's no appeal process. Joe Cook-Monroe will now take you through the committee report and the further amendments to the plan change. As I say, we have a number of experts around the room, including Wendy Embling online, our legal representative, and Tony. Both Tonys here can provide expert evidence as well. So I'll pass on now, Madam Chair, to Joe, take you through.
Good morning. Thank you for having me back again. Before I start going through the report, I just want to provide 2 key messages to keep at the front of your minds as we move through this. We don't have the option to not apply the medium residential standards. We do have the ability to modify the medium residential standards through the use of qualifying matters. Our technical reports on our 3 waters infrastructure have indicated that there is nowhere in the new medium density residential zone in Cambridge, Kihi or Te Awamutu where it will be the straight medium density residential standards of 3 times 3 story houses. It will be limited to basically 2 dwellings, which is currently what is permitted under our residential zoning. So having said that, I'd like to take the report as read, noting that there's a very big plan change attached to it, and also bringing your attention to the amendments to the recommendations that governance circulated yesterday. Does everyone have a copy of the amendments to the recommendations? So essentially, what we are putting before you is that you receive the report, that you approve the public notification of the plan change, subject to minor changes under recommendation C, and that you note that Wayne Allen, Group Manager for District Growth and Regulatory Services may make any final amendments to proposed Plan Change 26 that need to be made before public notification commences. So that's the changes to the recommendations from the report you received. You would have received yesterday a table outlining amendments that have been done since we saw you last week in the workshop. Please excuse my use of purple in the table. I have been told off by Rachel for using purple where I should have used grey, but oh well, I won't do it again. So we have gone through and we have started working on minor amendments. So we have amended the definition of building setback. We have deleted a proposed policy relating to density in section 2. We still have work to do on the qualifying matters in section 2A, and these are also connected to appendices 2 and 3. Which you would have seen in the attachments you got sent out on the plan change. So appendix 2 refers to our existing qualifying matters, and there's some tidying up that is needed there. Appendix 3 refers to our new qualifying matters, and more work is needed to justify the introduction of those new qualifying matters into the district plan and quantifying what the impact on the medium residential standards will be. Moving down the table, just more minor amendments. We, on page 2, it is proposed to delete a rule and relocate some matters for discretion. This will be done after the review of the assessment criteria has been completed, which is why it's still a task shown as still to be done. On page 3, you'll see that it is proposed to delete the non-notification rules and to replace these with new rules, and work is underway on that. And the idea of doing this is that all the non-notification rules will be in one place in section 2A rather than spread out amongst the various different rules as is currently done. Make it easier to read, provide a better understanding for people, and they've only got to go to one rule instead of several rules to find out what needs to be done. We also have further work to amend the matters of discretion for the qualifying matter overlays, and to have separate matters of discretion for each of the qualifying matter overlays. So each one will have their own assessment criteria, and again will provide a complete picture for that overlay of what the council will be looking at if that overlay is applicable. And then we get to page 6, and at the moment we have a corrupted plan change document. So Rachel, I and Kate and Rebecca will be working on that. So just to indicate that proofing, formatting, spelling, etc. will be ongoing, and we'll be doing that up until the last minute, noting that the plan change will be on our public website sometime on the 19th of August. So a week from this Friday. The section 32 report, a lot has been completed. I still have to complete the section 21 analysis. So indicate what has been changed in that section and do the efficiency effectiveness table. And as I've previously discussed, appendix 2 and appendix 3 are still being worked on. As well, we are making minor tweaks to our planning maps just to get more accuracy in the planning maps, with the hope of providing more certainty to the public once the planning maps go online with the plan change, that they should be able to generally identify where their property is located and potentially what overlays are affected by that property. So that is the work that we've done since we've seen you last, and the work that is still to be done.
Thank you, Jo. I don't envy your position at all. So is that the end of your report?
That's the end of the report. Wendy, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll open the floor then to some discussion, and I expect it's going to be reasonably robust and forthright. So take us away, Mayor Jim.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, and congratulations to the staff, really trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear here. And it really does concern me that all of our planning work and development over generations effectively is going to get thrown out with the bathwater here if we're not careful. But I've got a couple of questions. In terms of the independent commissioners, I suppose if they are truly independent, they will be interpreting the law as it's being cast by the ministry. So the chances of us getting the changes are pretty remote. Would that be a fair comment?
The independent hearing commissioner process means that they are also required to consider the evidence that is put before them. So while the standards are set out in the Resource Management Act, they also have to consider the evidence that Waipa District Council, Waikato District Council, Hamilton City put before them, and they have to balance that evidence up. We have the ability under the RMA to modify these new standards only through the use of qualifying matters. So we've been very particular about what qualifying matters we use. We haven't gone out on weak limbs, tree limbs at all. We have tried to stick to our core knitting. So the commissioners have to consider all of that. They can't just, and Wendy might be able to add more, they can't just sit there and going, this is what the law says, because while the law says we have to put these standards into our district plan, it also gives us the ability to modify the standards through the use of these qualifying matters. Wendy, do you have anything to add?
No, just really reinforcing what Jo has said. It is a unique plan change because it requires the council to take certain actions and only enables a modification of the MDRS to the extent necessary to accommodate qualifying matters. So that's really going to be the focus of the Commissioner's assessment, and that will be the important issue for evidence, to be able to establish that we do have qualifying matters and we do need to modify the way that the standards will apply within Waipa.
Thanks for that. And the other question is, once, if we assume that the change goes through and 3 houses, 3 stories, etc., ends up being the law, how quickly do we need to start looking at our infrastructure and investing in the upgrade of our infrastructure in the anticipation that we're going to need major improvements? And have we got even a wet finger in the wind estimate of what that's going to cost our existing ratepayers? Because I think we absolutely need to be advising our community just what this is going to cost them, not only in lost amenity, but what it's going to mean in terms of increasing rates. Because whether the development happens as anticipated by government or not, once the legislation is there, I presume we've got to start planning for it and upgrading our water pipes and sewage pipes and stormwater to cater for it. So have we got any idea what the implications of, from a cost is this for the community?
I can't give you a direct figure, but what I can say,
just as I say, a wet finger in the wind, because it's going to be mega millions, isn't it?
It is in the millions, yes. So as we've gone through this process with our water modelling, that encompasses all long-term projects and also our master planning projects to be facilitated. And through this model run, it's necessary that all those projects are there to get to even the point that we're at now with still limited restrictions. So that's where we'll need to bring through all of that infrastructure and resource that infrastructure to bring that in. So we've got those master plan projects indicatively scoped, but not fully itemised out pricing. So you're right, it is in the millions. And the risk that we have is in terms of referring to the other types of reports we've had in commercial feasibility that have outlined that sort of project scope and how much uptake there might be. That's the real risk that underlies. And that's where that limit and that debt limit funding will need to be. So I can't give you exact figures on what those project costs are, but you're right, it's in the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And another point on that is that that's only for the Three Waters infrastructure.
Yeah.
This doesn't take into account anything to do with the transportation, as it wasn't deemed to be a qualifying matter.
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, it really concerns me, I suppose, that in some ways we've been caught up in the intensification required for a city type infrastructure, and where I fully support more dense dwellings, but the challenge we've got as a small rural community is how we're going to have any influence over central government. There is only a handful of small communities like Waipa that have actually been caught up in this, and so trying to get I suppose some national support across the country. I mean, not national government, but across the country. Three Waters affected everybody, but this only affects a small number. So we're really going to have to go out on, I was going to say, pretty much on our own and advise the community just what the implications of this are. Because I just don't think at the moment that there's an understanding about what it's going to mean to our communities and why people come and live in Waipa and other areas around the country. So it's a real retrograde step from my perspective. Absolutely support the intention to get affordable housing and more of it, but this is not the way to do it. Sorry for the ramble.
Yeah, you can bet your bottom dollar you won't be the only one. Roger.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And Jim, I agree 100% with what you've just said. And I suppose my questions are flowing on the same vein. We're putting all of our hopes in the qualifying matters or the acceptance of qualifying matters. But my assumption is there is absolutely no guarantee that those qualifying matters will be accepted by the Commission.
This is just my personal view. I think it would be a very brave hearings panel not to take account.
Sorry, that's not the question I asked.
Qualifying matters,
Yeah,
because the qualifying matters are provided for in law,
I know.
and we have the ability to use them. I would expect as independent commissioners that they would look at the evidence that we provide for the qualifying matters. I can't at this stage guess how they will go.
Right, but I use the word guarantee, particularly because from what I'm hearing, you're saying it's your opinion that you think the commissioners, would be very brave not to, but there is no guarantee.
There is no guarantee.
There is no guarantee.
No.
No. And my second point is the hearing, we know, will be initially a joint hearing of the three councils, Hamilton City, Waikato and Waipa. And then there will be individual specific hearings for the items of specific interest to each. Hamilton City has got a totally different set of circumstances and possible opinion on what qualifying matters would be and the relevance to their environment being a big city environment. Is there a possibility that the Commission, in hearing their views, might actually set precedent and therefore apply whatever they think is appropriate to Hamilton to the other two district councils.
Madam Chair, excuse me, I can probably help with that, and maybe Wendy might want to help as well. So we're expecting directions from the chair of the commissioner, the commissioner chair shortly. And you're correct that the first tranche of hearings will be scheduled for January 2023. And that will be a combined hearing to set the foundation and the approach of all of the three Waikato IPIs. And so the way the commissioner has asked for that is what is the strategic approach of the three councils to these IPIs, to these plan changes? And so in discussion with Wendy, and she wanted to comment, we're thinking that that first set of hearings will be to set the foundation and the commonality between the three councils. And one example of that is Te Ture Whaimana. So it's unique to the Waikato region and unique to our three councils who are doing this. There's no other councils in the country that have that. And so the first hearing will be opening submissions from our council, which will be Wendy, and a statement from staff around our strategic approach to this plan change. We don't expect at that hearing, because the council has been collaborating on this today, we don't expect at that hearing that there'll be many differences in the strategic approach, because all three councils are quite aligned. Where those differences will come up is at the second tranche of the hearings, which is where there'll be individual hearings on each individual plan change. And at that point, the commissioners will separate out those matters. So I understand exactly what you're saying, but I think that will be dealt with through the way the hearings will be managed in the two tranches.
And is it likely that the Hamilton City individual hearing will occur before Waipa?
They haven't been scheduled yet, so we've got to work around also for really busy hearing commissions as well. So the chair's on, I think, 2 other IPI plan changes and chairing those. So we've got to schedule those. They haven't been scheduled yet. So we don't know the order of those. Wendy, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, just the comment in terms of Hamilton City's approach being quite different. We have seen the consultation version of Hamilton's plan change, not the final one. And you're right in the respect that they do have some centres where they are proposing more lenient provisions, and that's something that isn't relevant to Waipa. However, they have taken a similar approach in respect of the density of dwellings that are appropriate in their general residential zone because of infrastructure capacity issues. So they do actually have some big areas of alignment with Waipa as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Claire.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. And I agree completely with everything that's been said already. Yeah, in fact, I'm really concerned about the future rates rises that we're going to be forcing on our communities when it's out of our control, because it's been something that's arisen out of this poorly designed policy change. And I really commend all staff on the work that you've done so far, yeah, because it is a massive job. So I've just got a few minor points I just want to clarify. Firstly, in the national direction, there was no mention of the national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity. Now, I know that there was that was mentioned in the expert report that you commissioned for the open spaces, that they recommended that it be taken into account, or that there was maybe, I guess, some impacts that should be considered. I'm particularly concerned, I know it's not already operative or, you know, been sort of put into law yet, but we are expecting it soon. And there are obligations there at the moment in the draft one for local authorities. And my biggest concern is providing for highly mobile fauna native species. Yeah, because I think that it could have impacts on them. Yeah. And so I was wondering whether or not that was considered, or if you'd consider including it.
It was a conscious decision because it is only at the draft stage and it's a draft out for consultation, that it provides an indication of where the government may be heading on Indigenous biodiversity. but has little legal weighting at this stage. So it's a conscious decision not to add it into our review of statutory documents.
Does that mean that there's a bit of a gap there when the plan change is actually notified? Or
We have, as much as we've been able to pick up the recommendations from the Open Spaces Green Infrastructure report, but have done so at a general level and not used the draft MPS to justify the inclusion of those matters.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I felt that you were relying on water quality, which is provided quite well for through, the Ture Whaimana documentation or policies. But there's also habitat and also the need for integration or wider considerations, I guess. So, yeah, and the fact that those, I suppose those highly mobile fauna extend far beyond the boundaries of Waipa. Yeah, okay. I guess we'll just have to wait and see whether or not those protections can be relied on in another way. I noticed that beehives are still in one of the qualifying matters or discretionary items.
Not a qualifying matter. They have been left in. I did have a go at deleting them, but Wendy quite rightly pointed out that they actually don't relate to the medium density residential standards, and I should not fiddle with them. So that's why they're still in there. There will come a day when we get to do a plan change that gathers up all the miscellaneous stuff we've got, including the beehives, and amends the district plan. Okay, all right. Then there was a mention of mature trees being encouraged to be retained. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like stronger wording around that, because native bats are known to use mature trees, as habitat, and I thought we could say something like that. So rather than encourage that mature trees be retained if all possible, and that space be allowed for future mature trees as well.
I will give that a good go.
Yeah, that's great. And I also noticed that I can give you the page reference, that when you've got an application for a resource consent where the density is exceeding the MDRS, it's on page 83 of your report or 97 of our agenda. The wording is that there would be no public or limited notification of that. And I was a bit surprised about that, because I mean, this is actually going above and beyond the MDRS intensity. Yeah, but you didn't think there was warranted that even limited notification would be provided?
The non-notification rules are still being worked on, so I'm happy to make a note of that and double check that with Wendy.
And I might clarify through the chair again. So there is a requirement in the NDRS that we include rules that negate the need for notification. So it's a requirement as part of the standard that we include rules that says that in particular circumstances, the resource consents will either be not notified at all or only limited notified if needed. So it's actually a requirement to put that in.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a concern, especially when we're thinking about our communities who are living around these higher density areas, and that they may not even know that it's going to happen or have any say. Cool. And then just I also agree with the concerns raised about traffic effects, the fact that we're wanting safe neighbourhoods, but if we are allowing these high density developments and at the moment we don't really have any tools or mechanisms where we can upgrade the roads or the intersections in particular, we may be faced with, neighbourhoods where, we have kids run down or, we have accidents, that we're not used to seeing because of the higher level of traffic and the fact that it's just not, that the roads aren't built, in a way that, can provide for the safety adequately.
Chair, perhaps just to clarify that, so financial contributions are within scope of the plan change. And we've already got existing financial contributions with a formula in there for taking contributions to upgrade roading, amongst other things as well. So we do have a tool in there. We just don't know yet how we're going to apply it, because we don't know what the level of uptake might be. But just to reassure you, there is a mechanism in there that we can take some contribution towards mitigating those effects.
Yeah, I don't take that much sort of consolation from that, because I do think that that financial contributions tool is really blunt and may not be able to provide the finance level that might be needed. Yeah, and I do think that it's a price, that's going to be pushed onto our communities, unfortunately. Yeah. And the only other thing I wanted to mention was the concept plans for Pirongia and Nahanapuri really should be village concept plans, please. Rather than town concept plans.
I have used the titles that they currently are on the website. So understand perfectly what you're saying, not within my remit or the scope of the plan change to change them at this stage, unfortunately.
I'm pretty sure that Pirongia village concept plan was the title, but yeah, I'll stand corrected.
I will ensure double check, but I took the titles off the web page. So
I'm in an election year, and I just think it would be really, really dangerous for my health and safety when I go out on the streets. But yeah, thank you very much.
We're all about health and safety here. Graham, you can have a go.
Thank you. Good morning, Joe. As I read through this, I see that Council has talked to mana whenua, and I'm particularly concerned about the fact that we don't think we can cater for the stormwater when we go to a higher density. And I'm quite amazed that iwi haven't picked up on the fact that that could impact on the river. And I know that the river is very precious to them. Would that be something that we could lean on in terms of some considerations for Waipa? Because, we have the mighty Waikato going through Cambridge and out through, Kiiki, and a bit further beyond we have the Waipa and the Purnia rivers. And I would have thought that because those rivers are so precious, that they probably would have put more emphasis on those things that are going to happen, because you can't cater for stormwater at this stage. Now, you can't fix stormwater in 2 minutes. I mean, that's the hard one, because it's just millions of dollars, I would suspect, in conjunction with road upgrades and what have you. But I just wondered if that was something that we could lean on for us as a district, a special district. Yeah,
so mana whenua, the pre-notification consultation, that's a mouthful, they got an incomplete copy of the draft. I have been talking to my peers at Tainui, Maniapoto and Raukawa, and they are all intending to submit on the plan change. So the fact that they haven't come back in the initial pre-consultation doesn't raise a lot of concern for me. They know that we were intending to use Te Ture Whaimara as a qualifying matter. They asked that we treat it respectfully and not use it as a weapon, as it's been a hard fought battle for them to get the vision and strategy for the Waikato River. They are aware of the stormwater impacts, and again, that is another qualifying matter that we are using for the plan change, and we are using that to emphasise impacts that increased stormwater runoff will have on the rivers. So there is a connection. It's not a for me it's straightforward, but I've lived and breathed this now for many months. The expectation that I've had from our JMA partners is that they will be submitting on the plan change itself.
Anybody else have any things they want to add? Andrew.
I suppose. First of all, I just want to, commiserate with you, really. I mean, you told us what a body of work was involved in doing this, but till I got this agenda, I wasn't really probably aware of just how massive a task you have been, put to produce this.
People here at the start.
Yeah, well, we won't go into here because it's a bit of a touchy subject. Yeah, So first of all, congratulations on what you've done to date in protecting our towns by using, the tools that were available. It seems like an awful lot of work to kind of stand still to me from where I'm sitting here, but that's as it may. It does strike me, however, that what the government's trying to achieve here is also, to some extent, what we want to achieve going forward. Keeping our footprint of our towns, smaller, not just spreading out and taking our protective soils and our and making public transport more viable. I mean, those kind of goals are, what we are, I think, probably in the future looking to come to as well. And while I certainly do not endorse how it's been, how the government's gone about doing this, not even the smallest bit. If it's making us think about how we can achieve those kinds of things in a more cost-effective way, I take on board the waters thing in particular. But having said that, I mean, the practical side of me says, well, renewals come along, and when they do, make them adequate without simply just ripping everything up all in one go and replacing it. If we do manage some intensification of housing, it's not going to happen overnight or all at once. So yeah, I mean, look, this is outside my area of expertise, I'll freely admit, but those thoughts do strike me, and I think it's not really anything to do with this plan change. I think totally what you guys have done is absolutely what should be done. I have no doubt at all. But we're going to need to think of those things going forward. I guess that's my point. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Lou, and then Marcus.
Yeah, thank you very much. I once again reiterate the words that Andrew just said. Thank you very much for a superb job in a very difficult situation. As I say, it's a very, very complex document, but the issues that raise is that we as representatives, our ratepayers, are really going to carry a lot of the can on this. And I look at the whole issue as something where we normally could plan a little bit through the resource management where we have our development within our cities, our towns. And when we look at this broad paintbrush, we're looking at something like Kiki, for example, which doesn't have a great transport hub at the moment, where you've got lack of any supply of garages. So people are going to have their transportation reliant on parking on roads or wherever. It's actually something that we're going to have to build into this somehow. We can't control that. The second issue that I have with this is the fact that we are going to see no regulation on size. So we can have a situation where they don't necessarily have to even supply a wide driveway to where you'd have normal car parking. So you could have just a pedestrian access to these 2 or 3 buildings, which would add to the actual pedestrian accesses or need for transportation again. So I'm just looking at a wider view. So I really support and clear with that the costs and DCs, I can't see, although they're a very blunt instrument, covering all of that infrastructure, because once it goes beyond the street, we have to look at all of the rest of the infrastructure which would go on out. So it makes it very, very difficult. So I can understand why we're getting independent commissioners, but I do think that when we present our case, we've got to actually exercise the realities of the disparity between even Cambridge, Tiamutu and Kiki. We've got disparities within our own communities of transportation and infrastructure, and that all has to be developed over time. I just feel this is a terribly blunt tool, and it is actually put in such a way that although I agree with Andrew that the ideology behind it has some perspective, I do disagree in the way it's being put together.
Thanks, Lou. Marcus.
I don't really have anything else new to say, apart from it'll be quite interesting to see what the public feedback is going to be and see what our communities are going to think about this. I think, yeah, it's going to completely change, my small village of Kiki if it goes ahead with the parking and the elevations and things. But I think this will be quite important for us to go out to our communities and get the message out there about how important feedback is on the subject. So yeah, I'm quite looking forward to seeing what our ratepayers say.
Roger.
It's on now. Thank you. I'm really in two minds on this particular issue. Everything we've read and all the opinions that we've heard state that this is not going to be good for our communities or our ratepayers. If we take this decision to notify this, we're actually taking that decision out of our hands. It then goes into the hands of the commissioners and the interpretation of the arguments or the submissions, both for and against. And we heard that perhaps government will be keeping an eye on and making their voice heard at the hearings. Nearly 3 years ago when I was elected, and we all did the same thing, we took an oath to make a decision in the best interests of our community. As far as I'm concerned, that decision for me now is not to put this forward for the next stage of consultation, because it's taking it out of our hands. So from that regard, I'll be voting against this motion, even though I know that we're under instructions to do so.
Just clarify, Madam Chair. So in a normal plan change, you're correct. The commissioners make the decision. In this one, it's different. So the commissioners only make recommendations. Those recommendations come back to this council, and this council has the power to make the final decision based on the recommendations of the independent commissioners. If the recommendations are accepted, then there's no further process. If this council doesn't agree with the recommendations of the commissioners, then it can put up an alternative. That alternative then goes to the Minister for the Environment, who makes the final decision. So I just wanted to clarify that, because it is an important but subtle difference, is that these commissioners can only make recommendations, but this council has the power to make the final decision on the plan change.
But can I also, just in response to that, say even with the modified changes that you've made, and you've done a really good job, and I cannot say enough about the work that you've done to make the best job, still what we're finishing up with is not good for our communities.
Just in response to that, I agree with what you have said, but the alternative, if we do not notify this plan change, is that the minister can direct Gary as the chief executive for the council to notify our plan change. And that plan change might not be the plan change that has been put before you with qualifying matters. So speaking with Ministry for Environment, Ministry for Housing and Urban Development, they are hoping that they do not have to use that power, but that power is actually there for the minister to direct our chief executive to notify our plan change.
Madam Chair, just to elaborate on that, Wendy hasn't been briefed on this, but there was some thinking this morning about what happens if this decision isn't approved. Joe's right, but there are also other powers. So the minister can pull the plan change in and do it for us. They can appoint an independent commissioner to overturn the decision of this council if that decision isn't acceptable to the minister. So I guess the point here is from staff, and Wendy may want to comment on this. It's obviously your decision, but there are powers under the RMA which Joe's alluded to, and there are different options there for the minister to come back and, I guess, do it for us if they feel that that's the need. So I just wanted to share that. I'm not sure if Wendy, through the chair, wanted to make any comments around that.
Yes, there are a range of different powers. In the regulatory impact statement for the Amendment Act, they set out the most likely powers that would be used, and it says that if council fails to comply with the requirements of the Act, there are options in the RMA available to the Minister for the Environment to A, investigate the performance of local authorities in giving effect to the NDRS, B, provide recommendations to the councils on improving their performance, C, direct plan changes, and D, as a last resort, apply residual powers to appoint someone to carry out the local authority's functions and duties. So that's their indication of, I guess, the hierarchy of actions that they could take.
So Wendy, that's if we choose not to notify.
That's right.
Okay. Sorry, Tony, I was slightly distracted before when you were answering or addressing some of the issues raised by Roger. The recommendations that come back from the Commissioner come back to us, and we then make a decision on whether to accept those recommendations. Is that correct?
So they make recommendations back to this council, and this council makes the final decision whether to accept or reject those recommendations.
And those recommendations could be either that we have sufficiently satisfied them, that we have qualifying grounds and therefore ability to moderate, or we haven't satisfied them. Is that right?
That's correct. And don't forget, through the process as well, we've got a number of experts that we can bring, and we fully expect to bring them to the table to I guess support what we've put up, but also to strengthen and modify if we need to. So we do have that ability to introduce that to the commissioners through the process. So this isn't the final version, and there is the opportunity to elaborate on what we've done through that process as well.
Cool. So in the event that the recommendation comes back that we haven't satisfied them of qualifying matters exist, and we then don't accept their recommendations, what happens then?
Well, I'd expect it wouldn't get to that stage. And again, Wendy may want to comment, but knowing the chair and knowing the commissioners that we've got and the calibre of them, I would expect they would give us the opportunity to go back and redress any shortcomings that they think or they see in the plan change. So what would typically happen is the chair would adjourn the hearing, and they'd say, I'd like to invite the council to go back and reconsider what they're putting up and provide additional evidence. So we just wouldn't get a recommendation at the end that we're not prepared for or as a surprise for us. That's what I'd expect to happen, knowing this particular chair. So again, we've got some opportunities in there to modify as we go forward and respond to any matters that the commissioners want us to respond to.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Liz.
Thanks, Susan. Look, I can see how tempting it is to not to want to proceed, but I probably disagree with Roger's comments, because I think that by not moving to the next stage, the alternative, with the powers that we've just talked about now, is potentially going to cause more restriction, and it could possibly more frightening for us as well. I think for Waipa at the moment, the wise thing to do is to move to the next step. Sounds like we have some influence, at least with the reports that we've got on the table, through the qualifying matters, and at least we have some kind of small amount of control, although I appreciate that there's no guarantee, but there's at least some influence, that we can try and sum up for Waipa. I do want to hear from our communities as well. I think that's really, really important. I appreciate what Andrew, you said. There's still a really bigger picture at play here, and there's a lot of housing requirements for Waipa too. We all acknowledge that. The process, as everyone has said, has been really, really difficult. So, yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards moving to the next step, publicly notifying. Hopefully, our communities will come out with a really clear I guess, voice as well. I'm just really disappointed. We're almost a victim of our own success being tier 1. When I look at the places that this is going to be, Tauranga, Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton, Auckland, it's just in some of the sort of outlining areas. This is just unfortunately we're wrapped up in such a small group. And so that national voice is not going to be heard. And that's where I think we might have had more strength. But yeah, I'm keen to move to the next step and then hear from the communities. And then hopefully we just have to hope that these commissioners really look at Waipa and what our strengths are, and hope that we can, pull together some of those qualifying matters that mean the most to us as a community.
Thanks, Liz. Bruce.
I just a question on the submissions that anyone can publicly the plan when it's notified, anyone can submit, but questions are that these standards contain density and bulk and location controls which cannot be changed by way of submission on the plan change. So and right at the end, if you put a submission, you can't amend or delete anything in the MDRS. Do the public know that? When you publicly notify it, are they told the basics?
We have got an amazing communications plan, and we're also doing webinars, and that could be something that is common across the 3 webinars that I'll be doing. It's an essential fact to actually put it out there so people know what's going on, and it will remove some of the angst moving forward if people realise that you can't actually change those, and hopefully would limit the number of out of scope submissions that might have to be decided by the hearings panel moving forward.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just following up on that. So we're going to be, that's one of the major issues I would have thought, the yard requirements that is going to concern people. So we'll be saying in the comms plan that you can't actually, well, you can submit, but it won't be taken into account. Is that what you're saying?
To a point, some of our qualifying matters actually modify the yards.
Yeah.
So my understanding is it's, and Wendy, please jump in here because my brain's a bit scrambled. It's the density, it's the standards as set out in the Act that can't be amended, but through the use of qualifying matters, we are proposing to amend some of those because of our qualifying matters. So instead of three-story houses everywhere, we have qualifying matters that indicate it's only appropriate to have 2 houses or 2 dwellings on a residential site. So somehow we need to get the message out that they are better to focus outside of the MDR standards as they are set in law, and look at the qualifying matters and look at the modifications that have been made, because they are the things that can be changed through submissions. The actual standards themselves cannot be.
Feels very much like asking yourself a question: when is a decision not a decision, and when is a submission not really a submission? It feels very odd, very, very odd. Any other questions or comments from members around the table? Andrew.
Really a question or comment is just with the, what we've heard, I think not to go forward would be a wrong move in my opinion, and I'm on that basis happy to move the recommendations A, B and C.
I was actually going to deal with them separately just in case there were differing views around the table. But I guess before I invite somebody to move those separately, I guess I came in here feeling really quite sick about this whole thing. And whilst I accept the need for intensification, obviously we've got to protect our gorgeous precious soils, of which Waipa has 36% of highly productive soils. And I also acknowledge the need for ongoing provision for increased housing and affordable levels as well. And that whole housing issue is really complex. You've got all these competing tensions. I just felt quite sickened largely by the fact that this is a really heavy-handed, overreaching central government bipartisan decision. which has ignored anything about what I think around this table we hold dear, which is the local part of local government, local people making local decisions about local issues that affect them locally. And I guess that's why I feel really, quite frankly, gutted about the position we're being placed in now. I accept the realities of as sort of picked out by Liz around starting a process, and that this isn't necessarily a one-way street. But I have this really strange deja vu feeling of about 2 years ago talking about Three Waters, and I don't know if anybody else has that same feeling of starting a process that looked like it could have we could have some control or influence. I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I guess I came in here thinking I wasn't going to support changes that might have had the potential to increase the degradation of our waterways, that could have the potential to create slums of the future, that could have potential to, basically bulldoze our heritage that we hold so dear here in Waipa. And from a personal perspective as a farmer, I find it quite unusual to have the focus taken off us a little bit in terms of water quality issues, but that's another discussion. I think that the issues raised around the costs of infrastructure and what this is going to mean going forward for our ratepayers and the affordability of that is something that, it's an unknown iceberg, right? We see the tip, but we've got no idea how deep it goes. And that's a real challenge. And I feel quite sick for our residents for that going forward and what those future rate rises could well look like. However, I'm assured by one of the set of the Tonai that there is some chance that our commissioners will be able to see those the qualifying factors that we have raised, 3 very strong grounds, I think, to moderate those to the extent that's necessary to accommodate those factors for Waipa, because without it, I'm really fearful or concerned about what this could mean for the character and nature and the amenity of our district. So although I came in here saying I wasn't going to vote to have any support for a notification for this piece of SP&P change, I think I will do a small change, having listened to you all, and decide that I would support notification with great trepidation. So on that basis, I think, Andrew, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just actually a little question for our water expert. In terms of stormwater, what's going to be worse, going up or out? I mean, if we're going to grow, it's got to be one or the other.
It's a double-edged sword. So if you go up, you increase the impervious area, that increases the velocity in your pipes, and that increases the scour on your rivers as the velocity goes down the stream. If you go out, you are doing the same thing, but from a different angle. So you have to build in ways to do so. I would say going out gives you the room to put in attenuation devices of a larger scale, bioretention devices, those sorts of things. To do that in a higher up scale significantly increases the land cost to do so, because you're having to put in these green infrastructure devices inside these areas to mitigate that risk. So in terms of that response, the controlled growth cells allow you to do that because there's expected demand yield on those green infrastructure devices. There's no allowance in terms of the long-term plan or anything internal to allow those devices to be put inside the main CBD areas.
No, thank you.
Yeah, Graham.
Can we just ask for some clarification? I know this is a bipartisan thing in Parliament, and I guess if you're one of the 121 MPs sitting in Parliament and you want to build more houses, you're going to go, yeah. But no one's sitting down and thinking of the consequences for the poor ratepayers. Can I ask if any of our local MPs came in to get a heads up on how this would affect our ambience, our district, our ratepayers, or are they just sitting there supporting it willy-nilly regardless because it's a good idea to build houses?
Yeah, great question, Graham.
Yeah. I couldn't say specifically that I've seen any of the MPs come and ask those questions. I did say right from the outset that we were foisted, local government was foisted with this bill without any consultation. So we didn't have an opportunity to work with central government on the work that we were doing in relation to responding to the housing requirements for our district. And, we had Plan Change 21 and we still have Plan Change 21 lined up, looking at that, which we actually had to put on hold to accommodate this unfunded mandate. All we got was the opportunity, like other local government units, to comment on through the select committee process. So that in itself was quite disappointing, and we would have been able to inform central government if they had talked to us about the bill, more detail about the ramifications on our communities as a result of that. Unfortunately, we didn't get the appropriate opportunities to convey all of that information.
Madam Chair, if certainly I have spoken to our local MPs on a very, I suppose, off the cuff. It wasn't a formal request or anything. Basically, the question, what do you think you're doing with this proposition? This is just ridiculous for our communities. And the response I got back was, in terms of the bipartisan approach, was, well, as you rightly pointed out, how can you argue about getting more houses for people with a housing crisis? But I don't think the opposition parties have actually considered what the implications are of this. And look, I'm in the same camp as Roger and Susan in terms of feeling like I wasn't going to vote for this, but we've got to keep moving forward. And I suppose one of the concerning factors I had was imposing what I think is appropriate residential standards, and is that what actually the community want? I couldn't think of anything worse than living in a rabbit hutch 3 or 4 stories high. I want space around in terms of residential living, and that's what people who have immigrated or moved to New Zealand want. They wanted to get away from that industrial, high density residential living that's in many of the cities overseas. About the only option we've got once we've gone through this is recommend to our ratepayers they go and live in Morrinsville or Matamana, because they're out. Well, Prongia's got septic tanks. We won't go there, but effectively, why pick on effectively Tiamu and Cambridge, and believe it or not, Narrawakia and Huntly's tied up in this as well. So, where's the logic in this? But anyway, I think we need to move forward. We need to encourage the public to make their views known. And I'm more than happy to take it up formally with our MPs and just let them know exactly what they voted for, because they don't have a good understanding of it at all.
Thank you. Ironically, during the environment strategy work that Graham Pollard's been doing, reached out to a lot of the schools, and they have, I'm not sure how widely circulated the videos have been, but there was some really cool work done by kids at schools at Pukeatua and around the place, and there was a resounding theme right through it that they all want backyards. They all want backyards, big backyards to play sport and grow fruit trees and things. So it sort of just so flies in the face of that kind of line of messaging and what sort of is very archetypally and very New Zealand kind of Kiwi thing, isn't it? Everybody wants a lemon tree. Sorry, Graham, did you want to add something? No, you're fine. So I think we've exhausted our discussion on that issue. Andrew? You're happy to move A? I was going to deal with them separately, just on that basis, in case we had any members who wished to vote for one and not the others. So let me just return to where I should be. So it's on the screen now, isn't it? Behind me, in front of me. So the A is just to receive Joe's report, and Philip's going to second that. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And I think we'll deal with B and C together because they're not too dissimilar. So have I got anybody who's happy to move B and C of the recommendation that we approve the plan for notification and give Wayne all those wonderful powers as set out in paragraph C? Claire is going to move. Liz, were you going to second? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Yeah, in capital letters and underlined, yes. And against?
I acknowledge it should go forward.
Excellent. Okay, Roger, did you want your opposition recorded? Excellent, thank you. So the motion is put, the motion is 1. So we have managed to pass A, B and C in terms of that item. Hey, look, thank you, team. It's not been easy. I know you've grossly overworked and you're really up against it. So, and I want to acknowledge some of the comments made by other elected members in terms of their gratitude for your work in this space. It's not been fun and easy. So Friday's your last day, is it, Joe? Couple of weeks. Okay. Oh, thank you, Joe. Thank you for all your efforts. I'll see it for your farmers.
Madam Chair, around the land with the elections coming